Hello and good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining me for another session with Gert. This is slightly outside of my normal timeline, but I knew Gert was traveling. I knew I needed to speak with him, and he has gladly, happily given us some time to discuss some more of his thoughts. Now, let me warn those people who have not heard Gert before is that this is pretty heavyweight science. This is not something that you can easily just pass off. This is heavyweight thinking, and he's in the unique position that he has been studying this for years. And I'll be introducing him just in case people haven't seen him before and haven't heard about what he is and who he is and what he does. I'll let him introduce himself. But before we get into that, just a reminder that coming up in the next week and a half, 10 days, is one of our first conferences for the year, Hidden Drivers of Post-COVID Dysfunction. This will all be connected with what we're discussing. We're getting experts from across the world to start discussing what they're seeing, how these may present. And this is just the beginning of a series of conferences as we try and take apart the science to work out what is going on. So without further ado, I will add Gert in and he will tell us his insights as to what he thinks is going on and critically, maybe what we could do to prepare. Gert, can you please introduce yourself as usual to our audience?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Philip. So my name is Geert Vanden Bossche, and my background is veterinary medicine. But early on in my career, I moved on to molecular biology, immunology, infectious diseases, exclusively, in fact, concentrated on human infectious diseases. And so I specialized in these different domains: virology, immunology, have a PhD in virology, also studied environmental virology. And so after a career of about 10 years in academia, I then moved on to the vaccine industry. And I worked with a number of big vaccine companies. And then ultimately moved on to work with global health organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, also Gavi, had also collaborations with the WHO. I also had and still have my own consultancy company advising on biotech challenges, let's say, small biotechs or also larger biotech. But then when COVID came along, I fully concentrated on the evolution of the virus. I was very concerned about the mass vaccination, since I thought it would completely change the natural evolution of the virus. And since about 2020, 2021, that's what I've been exclusively doing and studying, these very complex dynamics of a natural pandemic that has been severely, dramatically influenced by, first of all, infection prevention measures, and then later on the combination with the mass vaccination program. And it's within this context that I've been exchanging on several occasions right now my opinions and insights with many people. I've also a forum of immune biology where I explain a little bit the immunology of pandemics and epidemics. And I'm also always glad to share my insights with Philip. So Philip, thanks for having me.
Excellent. And Garrett, just in case people are hanging around when you're doing your round Europe travels, where are you going in this trip and where could people bump into you?
Well, I will be going to the Lake of Constance, but of course I will travel through Germany. I've already a couple of appointments, so meets and greets in Germany, and then of course from well, not of course, but the Lake of Constance, I will move on to Switzerland, where I always, so for example, Zurich, but also Lucerne, Geneva, Lausanne, where I will be meeting people. So it will be, I think, after this long period where we communicated through video conferences, emails, WhatsApp, etc. It will be great to meet people live again. And then I will come back through France. So it's in fact all within about 7 or 8 days. So it will be very busy, but at the same time, this is kind of like a little bit relaxing because this have all in one way or the other become friends. And in the meantime, yeah, I'll do my very best to also enjoy nature. These are fantastic places: the Lake of Constance, Lake Geneva, where I've been working in Geneva for some time. And then also to the Lake of Annecy. Some people will. I love water, so all places where I go, there always needs to be water, the sea or rivers or big lakes. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, Philip, what I will do as of.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Great, great, great. So let's just start off with you did a recent post where you made reference to what the World Health Organization had been saying and their recommendations. And it would be interesting to explain to the audience what was being said and what are your views on what was being said.
Well, in the WHO, of course, is very well aware of all these variants that are popping up and of the changes in the dynamics of the pandemic. They are very well aware that the variants that are circulating right now are very, very different from those that initially circulated. They also know that the vaccines that have been, put on the market, so to say, are no longer very effective, etc. But they continue to strongly believe in the power of these COVID vaccines and that updated vaccines will still do the job. And of course, they are not saying that they will protect against infection, but they will protect you still from disease and from severe disease and all these things. And they are putting this on their website with a lot of bureaucratic language, which is always, especially to lay people, pretty impressive, because then people think, wow, there must be a lot of substance behind all this, complicated, sophisticated, very scientific language. But when you look at this, they are pretty honest, I must say, about the fact that they have, in fact, no clue what is going on right now. So they are saying that indeed, and we all know this, that there is very little monitoring being done these days. So genomic sequencing, virological, epidemiological surveillance, all this is, no longer conducted these studies at the frequency they were back 1-2 years ago. And they also admit that, of course, there is little documentation reporting of the, hospitalizations, deaths, etc., in relation to COVID, etc. So they admit that there are major gaps in their understanding of what is going on currently. And what is correlated, if there is still any correlation with the vaccines and the newly developed vaccines, so the updated vaccines, that there is no really efficacy studies done on these vaccines, and that also even the immunogenicity studies are very scarce, etc. So then you ask yourself, how is it possible that in the context of this major gap in their knowledge and in their understanding where things are going, that they still, with this kind of conviction, persuasion, try to make people believe that they should continue getting the vaccines. And this is what, to me, is scientifically makes no sense. It's completely absurd. It's very disturbing, actually, that an organization like the World Health Organization is making still this recommendation and promoting the use of vaccines, whereas, between the lines, you clearly read on the website, that they don't understand. They have no clue where things are going right now, and yeah, so
So
that's
this raises an important point, Gert, and I want you to think carefully about this. If you've been doing this research now for 4 or 5 years, imagine that you hadn't, and that you were going along with the narrative, and then suddenly you go, you know what? Um, this could be a problem because we're seeing evolution of disease in a way that we haven't seen it before. We're seeing IgG4, we're seeing, things are not quite right. And that person, not you, says, you know what, I'm going to get directly into this science now and try and make sense of it. How difficult is it to be able to jump in at this point and make sense of what is currently happening?
Yeah, that's of course an interesting question, but the answer is very simple. To me, that seems completely impossible. And I would think of an easy example. Let's say you're sitting at your desk and you have a lot of documents, and you make piles, and you sort out documents, and you put them at a place that you think is very logical. I will find them very easily. And then as months and years go by, you're just piling up many documents. You don't have enough place on your desk, so you need to put some stacks over the others, and it's all piling up. And then all of a sudden, somebody comes in after this 3 4 years where your desk has been turned into a big mess finally, and you ask this person, sort out these documents and give me this document. This is about this or this subject topic. Please find me the document. It's simply impossible. Simply the when you have this entropic evolution of disorders, when you disturb a system, let's say an ecosystem that is very well balanced, and you disturb this, everything starts to fall apart, and things that fall apart will have repercussions on other parts of the components of the system, and you have all these cascades that finally add to the complexity in a way such that it's impossible to retrieve what at the origin was causing, in fact, this perturbation. And so the answer is very simple. It's impossible to find your way in the chaotic situation. You look at the viral mutations, they are chaotic. Even people who are doing this all day long are now confused. They don't understand where all these mutations all of a sudden come from. They cannot predict them at all, even not with their models. The same is true for the immunological responses. They're all over the place, and there are very harmful effects, and there is dysregulation, and people start analyzing the different components. They don't know how all this is connected, and then also the clinical symptoms. Look at the complexity. This disease has completely changed. It was initially an acute self-limiting infection, and now it is chronic, and the chronicity has also a number of side effects, I would say, that go from immunological perturbation, immunological disorders, over cancer to long COVID, etc. So how to make sense of all this if you have not been following this from the very beginning? It is simply impossible. Nobody looking at this right now can see the forest for the trees. It's impossible.
It is pretty significant. I agree with you. I mean, I've as I said, I've been doing the research, following the discussions, observing clinically what is going on. This is one complex situation. And a lot of people don't quite grasp that the infection and the manifestation of disease is completely different from what it was early in the pandemic. And so, therefore, people perceive that the infection is mild, even though it is causing all kinds of immune dysregulation, which then causes death down the line. To be frank with you, I am not sure, and I think you're right. I am not sure if it is possible at this point, if they haven't been looking at this, to make sense of it. I mean, even when I am looking at it now, and I look at this almost every single day, trying to predict what is going to happen next is almost impossible.
Yeah, well, yeah. It's impossible to go. Yeah, already right from start, it was a complex phenomenon. It is an interplay, as I'm always saying, between the virus, the immune system. A pandemic is per definition at a global level, at a population level, and then you influence this with artificial interventions like stringent infection prevention measures. You combine this with mass vaccination, etc. That already was a very complex phenomenon. But then, of course, as things start to derail and to be dysregulated, and I think everybody will agree on this, because everybody agrees that the response of this has been suboptimal. It has been suboptimal, not preventing the transmission of the virus, not controlling the transmission, therefore not generating herd immunity. And then, of course, the virus evolves. You have natural selection of mutants that can overcome certain immune responses. The immune system that has a huge resilience is exploiting the full arsenal of immunological tools that it can possibly bring forward, to mitigate the effect of the infectious virus. And so it's like going on, one chasing the other. The virus adapts. Well, the immune system, the adaptive immune system, that has per definition, the capacity also to adapt, will also, become more diverse. There will be additional immunological responses that will be directed no longer, as was the case in the beginning, primarily against the spike protein that is responsible for the infectiousness, but also against other proteins now, to inhibit or to hamper other viral functions that are responsible, for example, for replication, transmission, etc. So the complexity becomes just huge. And what we are seeing in the publications is that people are just, they're jumping on one particular aspect. They're fully developing this. They're drawing some conclusions, which, because of the dynamics of the pandemic, do no longer apply in a couple of weeks thereafter. Right.
So, what I wanted to try and understand here is, based on what you have been observing, have you been impressed by just how profoundly versatile the human immune system is, even within this kind of situation?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that is also the reason why I have been wrong, and with my timelines. I thought once we had, a situation where the selection, the immune selection would be such that the variants are capable of breaking through the vaccine-induced protection. That's what we call the vaccine breakthrough infections. I thought that is the end. That is the end. You now have people that are fully vaccinated, and guess what? The virus just breaks through that immunity. And these people, as I've always said, many of them that have been vaccinated right away before having been exposed to natural infection, they had no innate immunity developed. So if that is very weak, that element of the immune system is very weak, and then you break through the adaptive immune system, then it seems like you have no single immune defense left, and any virus that replicates and spreads and can kill host cells is highly virulent in the complete absence of immunity. But then you have had, and I've developed this very complex, this phenomenon of immune refocusing, where, the immune system finds a way to concentrate on other epitopes, on other antigenic sites of the spike protein, of other viral proteins, and comes up with new immunological responses that were very broad, so the vaccine producers and public health authorities, they were very excited because these immune responses were active against a broad spectrum of variants. But guess what? They were suboptimal in a sense that they declined very rapidly, and there was barely any memory. So it was again suboptimal, promoting against selection of more infectious variants, etc. And so the immune system moved on. It moved on from fairly efficient, but still suboptimal, but fairly efficient neutralizing antibodies against spike. Then, as we saw, Omicron came, the vaccine breakthrough infections, you saw more and more contribution of cellular responses like T cell responses, etc. What you're seeing right now with the multitude of variants is that also now more and more innate responses are involved, but all these secondary or all these immune responses that came later have one thing in common. That is that they are much less specific. And because they are much less specific, they're also weaker. They are less powerful, and hence because they're powerful, they further promote immune escape, right? So it's very, very complex, but it has been very much evolving. And yes, I've been stunned by the resilience of the immune system to kind of like still mitigate this explosion, in fact, of viral variants, and to prevent them, despite the fact that these viral variants are highly infectious. The currently circulating viral variants are way more infectious than, for example, the early Omicron variants. And despite that, the immune system for a long time has still been able to more or less, at the population level, I'm not talking about individual cases, at the population level, to calm down the whole thing. So we had the impression that, yes, there was a kind of, not silence, but at least a break with regard to the acuteness, with regard to the severity of the pandemic. And but things are just continuing, and you see already that in some cases, the number of cases, hospitalizations, even deaths are picking up again. So it's like, I always compare this to, it's a little bit, it's a strange comparison, but I compare this a little bit to a lion that has been badly wounded by its enemy, and that is very slowly recovering from its wounds. But when it finally heals, it will exactly know how to take revenge on its enemy, right? And it will be very efficient in doing so. But this time, the period where this lion was healing its wounds, that is what we have seen over the past months, already many months, this kind of break. The lion is healing its wounds. During that time, it's not attacking. It knows it has no chance, etc. Of course, the pandemic doesn't work that way, but sometimes it helps when you draw parallels to things that people better understand.
One of the things that has been fascinating to observe, and I've mentioned it a number of times, is this thing about the IgG4 tolerant antibodies that are not trying to attack the virus, but to kind of keep it in check. I remember raising this point, and somebody then said, "Oh, well, this also happens with other vaccines." And I'm saying we're talking about 40 to 60% of the antibodies being these this cannot be normal. And it has to therefore have a significant impact on the immune system of the individual if every time they are boosted or infected, they are producing these kinds of antibodies. Have we, based on your vaccine experience, would you consider this to be a good thing?
You mean the IgG4 antibodies?
Yes.
No, no, certainly not. No, for me, it is a clear reflection of the failure of the immune system to be fully functional. Normally, I mean, you can talk hours and and days and weeks about antibodies, like you can do about cellular immunity. But in a case where you want, and that is important during a pandemic, you want to stop the spread of the infection, you're only interested in two things. These are antibodies that neutralize. So, how else can I say? They neutralize the virus. The virus is done. When the antibodies capture the virus will be destroyed. It will be neutralized. Or in terms of cellular responses, you're not interested in stimulating all kinds of T cell responses that do not kill virus-infected cells. You have either to eliminate the free circulating virus by neutralizing antibodies, and when it infects cell, you have to come up with T cells that kill the virus-infected cells. So now the IgG4 antibodies, for example, they are not doing this. We know they have poorly neutralizing capacity. So they are a kind of like antibody that is not really contributing to eliminating the infection. But what it can do most likely, but I've not seen very detailed studies on this, is that it will still bind to the virus. That's very clear. That has been proven. It still recognizes the virus, it binds to the virus. But by changing the surface properties of the virus, it can most likely promote the aggregation of viral particles so that you end up with larger viral complexes that can then be easily taken up by antigen-presenting cells and stimulate cellular immunity. And that's what I was saying. What we have seen during the pandemic is that when the humoral antibody responses became less and less efficient, for example, through the IgG4 antibodies, you got increasingly compensation by more like T cell activation and this type of thing. So all this for me is part of the immune refocusing, the huge versatility of the adaptive immune system to concentrate when certain epitopes don't work very well anymore because the virus has kind of evolved to make those epitopes resistant. For example, the epitopes against which the vaccine antigen was directed, then the immune system will choose other epitopes. And even if those immune responses are suboptimal, they still will prevent that, as I was assuming naively at the beginning, that all of a sudden the viral infection will go through without any limitation and would kill a large part of the population. No, that there is still a lot of mitigating capacity in the immune system, but it is no longer built on these neutralizing antibodies, nor on the cytotoxic T cells, but on a number of less functional immune effector cells like B cells that are going to produce these IgG4 antibodies, like T cells that are going to produce huge amounts of cytokines, etc., but are not killing virus-infected cells. And so, of course, all these immune cells that are not doing an optimal job, they lead inevitably to secondary immunological effects that are, in all cases, things that you don't want to see, right? Like you have chronic infection, for example. That means the immune system cannot control the infection. It is going to stimulate over and over again T cells that don't kill virus-infected cells, but these T cells, Philip, you are an expert in autoimmunity. I tell you, there is no autoimmune disease that does not involve chronic stimulation of CD4 T cells, for example, right? So same with the chronic infection. If you have an infection that the immune system cannot control, well, you will continue to stimulate the CD4 T, maybe also CD8 T cells, and this overstimulation of of cells that do not eliminate the pathogenic agent will have detrimental consequences and a lot of side effects in terms of, for example, autoimmunity, immune inflammatory diseases, you name it. Right.
Yeah, well, this is what I think is the big concern now, because many of these diseases don't happen quickly. So you don't see a surge of autoimmunity suddenly. What you see is a gradual transition where autoimmune responses start to get more and more frequent. And then over a period of 5 to 10 years, you then end up with full blown autoimmune disease. And so we are on that pathway. And my way of describing this is kind of like someone playing out on a beach where the sea has gone out, half a quarter of a mile, and they're walking way out, and they're not aware of the time that the tide comes in. And because they're not paying attention, the tide then starts to come in, and it can come in faster than you can get out. And
Yeah.
it's that kind of storm surge I describe as what I anticipate is happening, and very difficult to see. The closest to the suddenness of what we have seen before is kind of like what may be happening in Hong Kong, where they're finding patients presenting with more severe disease. I hope they do autopsies, because I'd love to see what the pathology is in those patients who were vaccinated and not yet boosted, because this is what they're finding. Is it seems to be patients who haven't had their extra booster dose that are more vulnerable. Almost like if you are on this treadmill, you can't get off. Any
Mm.
thoughts on what is happening there?
Well, yeah, I see this. I see all this, Philip, within the context of how the virus is evolving. So let me explain, and that is why there is a logical reasoning that helps you to understand where things are going. And when you do not connect the dots, it seems like none of this can be understood. But listen, I mean, we have, as I was just saying, the immune responses are now less and less efficient, in the sense that the immune system now needs to rely on subsidiary immune effectors that are less specific, less efficient, etc. So that means also that the immune pressure is lower. That also explains, to me at least, that the pandemic over the last few months has been evolving rather slowly. So that was this kind of break or pause I was talking about. The virus was still evolving, but it was not like at the beginning, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, omicron, all within a relatively limited number of months. And then what happens is that since these immune responses are less efficient, many individuals start to have more and more problems to control the infection. It's no longer an acute self-limiting infection. It becomes a chronic infection, which means that the virus can stay for much longer in their body, many more replication cycles, and therefore these are now individuals that come up with a lot of viral mutants. So it's in fact the individual immune pressure within one body that is now responsible for generating a lot of these mutants. And what will happen, in my opinion, and you were talking about Hong Kong, and Singapore is a similar story, is that you will see, as the immune arsenal becomes more and more exhausted, you will see more and more a convergence in the genomic features of the viral mutants that are shed by chronically infected individuals. So right now, or back a few weeks, a few months ago, the immune status of people in highly vaccinated countries was very heterogeneous in the sense that many people, some people got, depending on what type of vaccine they got, what how many vaccinations, re-exposure, whether they got re-exposed, etc. You got a very, very divergent landscape, which means that people who were chronically infected, because of different immune status, they were also producing or giving a fitness advantage to individual mutants or whole clades of mutants that were very different from one person to the other. But when you now start to further exploit the immune system, to in fact deploy the very last immunological tools it still has to mitigate this infection, since you're, moving to an endpoint, you will see that there is more and more homogeneity in the mutants that will be produced by those individuals. And when you start getting this homogeneity, because of a more homogeneous immunological situation, then of course that very variant can spread more easily in the population when it is shed by somebody who is chronically infected and it lands by somebody in somebody else's body chronically infected. The likelihood that this person will now have more or less the same immunological environment than the one who shed the virus becomes higher and higher as the immunological tools for defense have been exhausted. And that is what explains that now in certain countries, you have whatever variant that all of a sudden finds, a favorable environment. Although it was shed by one single person, it finds a favorable environment in many other individuals who have already arrived at the same immunological status, because there is an endpoint. I don't know whether you get this. This is complex. Maybe you can rephrase it in your own words so that it's more clear to the audience. But that will explain to me, while all of a sudden you will see that in several different populations, you will now have one variant that picks up and all of a sudden spreads much faster and becomes dominant. But this will continue to evolve till all the immunological defenses are exhausted. And when that happens, you will have a homogeneous immune status in that population, one, and you will have, of course, a variant that has managed to become completely immune evasive, because that is the endpoint towards it was evolving. And then it will, that is what I'm saying, that will still cause this explosion, this tsunami, if you like, that I'm talking about. Over.
Yeah, so I think that as I reflect carefully, I can see how in different regions, because what we're seeing now happening in Singapore and Hong Kong, um, in effect, those two countries are pretty closely connected because of travel. And so they will have more of a homogeneous population because they have been sharing similar viral variants and so on.
Yeah, and
And
highly vaccinated, Philip. Both
highly
of the countries are
vaccinated, yeah.
highly vaccinated. It's important. The higher the country is vaccinated, the more easily you will converge to this homogeneous situation. The endpoint, I mean, to the endpoint.
Yes, and so then if you're having this ongoing circulation, and I think the point that I think it doesn't come across as clearly sometimes is that the virus not only produces, say, IgG4 and so on, it literally depletes the lymphocytes and some of the natural killers. So every hit is taking the immune system lower and lower. It's kind of like watching a boxer being hit over and he just won't go down,
Yeah,
kind of like Rocky. And they keep on hitting and hitting. Eventually, there is nothing left. And at that point, you then see the the manifestation sometimes of multiple diseases. Now, the only thing is that based on the clinical perspective, those are the people who usually just get sick. You can't find a specific organism, they're just sick. You give them antibiotics, you give them antivirals, but you find out that this is now a fungal infection because they literally have no immune response left. And it is that kind of sequence. But what is difficult to predict is who and when. And it doesn't happen. I don't think this is going to happen in the same way as we saw early in the pandemic. That's my thought. I think that we are almost seeing a new manifestation of disease. The question is that it is unclear how it's going to manifest in terms of mortality. And I find that very, very difficult to predict. I think that the characteristics of severe COVID early in the pandemic, with a delayed interferon response, everybody has now been exposed. It's got to be different now. What happens when the virus is freely circulating? It is suppressing the immune system and exposing people to multiple other viral, bacterial, and fungal infections. And then they just get unwell. I mean,
Mm.
this is exceptionally complex. And I think the only thing is that you have to be on your toes, just observing and waiting to see if you can learn what is the next thing. This is why I said, say, for instance, what happened in is happening in Hong Kong and Singapore.
Mm.
Please let them do autopsies. Let
Mm.
us see if the pathology in the lung is the same as what it was early in the pandemic. And if it
Mm.
is different, why?
Yeah.
These are the kind of things we need to figure out.
Yeah. But, Philip, you were previously talking about the complexity. So this is another beautiful example of the complexity, because as the immune system of these people, is increasingly weakened, you have, of course, a high likelihood for them of contracting other diseases or reactivating latent viruses, developing cancers, whatever. And that are clear-cut diseases, that come with clinical manifestations. What people often forget is that in the meantime, the virus, COVID, continues also to evolve in these people because they are kind of like immune suppressed. So the virus continues to produce plenty of mutants. These people get reinfected also by COVID, even though they have, in parallel cancer or, maybe other diseases. And that ultimately, their immune system will get completely exhausted. And then what then happens is again a population effect, which is that this immune evasive virus then finds all of a sudden a very suitable environment to replicate in the majority of the other individuals in the population, because that is what it has been evolving to this end point of complete immune evasion. So that means that now all of a sudden, this virus is not just immune evasive in that particular individual, but in many individuals. So all of a sudden, because it has been thriving on this hostile immune environment, that is, that was the breeding ground for this whole evolutionary path of this virus, that all of a sudden it can spread, throughout the population like wildfire. So there is two things. There is the fact that it will, of course, cause disease because there is no immunity left, but also other diseases emerge because there is no immunity left. But the advantage of that particular pathogenic agent, that SARS-CoV-2 variant, is that it can spread like wildfire and increase the infectious spread in the whole population. And therefore, this must take, the priority and the predominant. This will be the predominant way for me. There is no doubt about this. And all the other diseases, will disappear in the shadow, I would say, of this wave. And that is why I'm always saying, this is of course philosophical, that's why I'm always saying nature will not continue with a crippled population.
So, one of the things that a lot of people are hearing, and this is coming from multiple angles, is that they are being told that COVID is no longer a problem. It is just a mild infection. It's not even a cold. It's not even as bad as flu. And everybody is now relaxed. Guards are down.
Yeah.
What do you say to the leaders or the people who have influence who are kind of helping people to think that the guard is down? For one, are they correct? And if they're not correct, why not?
Well, I would tell them the story that I just told you about the lion. I mean, we have seen this. This is the tip of the iceberg. The massive chunk of the iceberg is under the water. They cannot see it. What we saw in terms of clinical manifestations, etc., of course, except for a minority of individuals, is that obviously, compared to the beginning of the pandemic, things have calmed down. But again, the story of the lion, uh, and I'm a little bit worried, but I'm no longer going to predict whatever in terms of timelines. But I must say that I'm still a little bit worried about what is happening right now in Singapore, for example, and in Hong Kong. And I do not rule out that these things could easily start to happen tomorrow, in a week from now, in 2 weeks from now, in any other of these highly vaccinated countries. Because I'm asking myself, I'm wondering, is this the first sign of the lion already, starting to get up and to prepare itself for an attack? Is this the earth that starts shaking? Is this the wall of the tsunami that we see at the horizon, for example? I don't know. But very clearly, what I told the authorities already 2 years or 3 years ago is that society will be caught off guard, will be taken by surprise, because they don't understand, and the stakeholders certainly don't want to admit, and this is this willful blindness. But nothing is stopping nature. All this is fine, and you can tell whatever story you want. But the power of this, this has nothing to do even with intelligence. This has nothing to do, even artificial intelligence cannot take control of this. Why not? Because this is a complex, large-scale thermodynamic event, like a hurricane or a tsunami or an earthquake, or, you have many, many examples of this, which we call I'm not a specialist in thermodynamics, but I've started, to be interested to what extent, and you can look this up, pandemics are recognized, acknowledged as open thermodynamic events that are very complex and that cannot be controlled by human forces.
You know,
Humans can have an influence, and they can model, and they can start to predict, but these complex, large-scale thermodynamic phenomena can never, ever be controlled by humans or even artificial intelligence, and certainly not after what has happened now, where this pandemic is completely derailed. We're talking all the time about dysregulation of the immune system. We are talking about the very rapid and spectacular evolution of the virus, etc., etc. So it has taken a proportion where one should not even think about intervening with intelligence, pure human intelligence or artificial intelligence. That is, that you can forget, the only way this balance can be restored is by very strong natural forces that are way, but way beyond what humans can even imagine as a
so
solution for this
you
complex.
know what this is reminding me of, and people seem to have short memories. In about April or May of 2021, this is after we had started the massive rollout, there appeared in India a variant that seemed to be causing more deaths than usual. And I remember clearly the world going, it's just India. And literally within 3 months, that Delta variant swept the whole world, and it was the most lethal variant we had ever
Yeah.
seen. What is happening now in Singapore and Hong Kong have got to be a flag, because I can't see how that is going to be localized. And the question then is, how quickly could something like this have an impact across the world, across the world? And I think that this is where we forget the history as to how quickly these things can change.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's any preparation for that. And this is why these conversations, one of the problems is that a lot of people perceive this as fear mongering. They say that you're only just whipping people up to be afraid. But the reality is that if you don't consider all the possibilities, you're not doing adequate risk mitigation in the sense of anticipating what could happen and seeing if there is anything that could be done to intervene. What do you say to people who say you're just fear mongering now?
Yeah, well, I have already, since many, many months, changed my attitude towards this. So this, for example, Philip, is one of the very few interviews I'm still doing, because I know, having studied this and having, I think a clear insight or a helicopter view. I'm, of course, not understanding everything, but I'm understanding sufficient, because there is so many elements and there is only one way that, so many elements can fit together. So I'm terribly worried, and my message is always therefore worrisome, and you could say fear mongering. So therefore, I've stepped back a little bit from warning people, from being very active on social media, on repeating my message, on doing interviews, on insisting, to be heard, etc. That is how. I'm adapting to this. Yeah, of course, to this concern of people that my focus is to make them scared, to make them afraid. That is not at all the purpose. I mean, this is not at all of interest to me. But yeah, what can you do? So it's only when people explicitly ask me, to expand a little bit on this, like we are doing right now, that I come back with these consistent views. I mean, fear mongering, that could be very sensational for a couple of weeks or months, but I'm now saying this like 4 years, 4.5 years. Do I think, if it were fear mongering, that by continuing to spread this misinformation and these stupidities, that I could add to the level of fear mongering that I have already generated? No, of course not. So why do I continue to say this? Because, it is my 200% conviction that it will evolve, along those lines, and that we will have, not only within highly vaccinated countries, but even across highly COVID-19 vaccinated countries, we will have a situation where nature will restore the sound balance of that ecosystem. So that is very clear. And that will have individual impact on many individuals. But that is not what nature cares about, right? And I don't want to be too philosophical, but if you translate this into some philosophical things that people can understand, nature is all about continuing the species and the population. Of course, already by natural pandemic there are some casualties, but usually, and that would certainly have been the case with this pandemic, this would have been reduced to really a minority of the population. But after what we have been doing, You try to vaccinate, you do infection prevention, you do whatever you try, it's not going to have an influence, certainly not at this stage. It will go through. It will go through. We will not be able to escape the verdict. That is so. I'm very afraid to say that the only thing, what you can do, because it is all about viral infection. It's about the virus infecting you. Certainly, if you have, a jeopardized immune system, because the virus has been thriving on this dysregulated adaptive immune system. So if your natural immunity cannot control that viral infection, you have to rely on something external that can control it. And that is an antiviral drug that you could take prophylactically, that protects you against viral infection. But again, we don't know whether that will be sufficient, because of course, as I was saying, what you will have, in my humble opinion, is all of a sudden a very high infectious load, because that immune escape variant, that immune evasive variant, will all of a sudden thrive in the majority of highly vaccinated populations, because that has been the breeding ground. And then you can generate a huge infectious pressure. Will antivirals at a certain dose, taken at a certain frequency, be sufficient to stop that? I don't know. But if I were, one of the susceptible individuals, or at risk, I should say, I would definitely take it. Of course, I would take it. And again, I've never been saying that this will apply to all the vaccinees, but to be honest, to be very open and honest, I do think seriously that all people who are now suffering from long COVID and from chronic infection and from COVID-associated immune dysregulation, etc., are at high risk. I don't think that people who have been vaccinated have been doing well so far, or necessarily at high risk. But that is also one of the things. It's unprecedented. We will wait and see what happens. There is nothing else we can do.
So one of the questions that I think people have, and I have it as well, and I reflect on it, with regards to some of these variants. I made the point recently in a post that this was on LinkedIn, that caused quite a bit of upset against the pro-vax people, which is that Haiti, 2.8% vaccinated, was fine. And now a population like that has already been exposed to the virus, has got broad natural immunity covering not just the spike protein, but the N protein, the nucleocapsid, the envelope, the membrane protein, the ORF proteins. Will a population like that be at significant risk in the context of the evolution of these variants?
No, not at all. As I was saying, these variants, what we are now seeing. What I don't understand, Philip, is that when virologists or even biologists who understand a little bit virology, they must be totally surprised about the speed at which this evolution is going on of the virus, right? I mean, that is unprecedented, the velocity and the amplitude of the viral evolution. So it cannot be otherwise than that has been nourished, that has been made possible by the broadly shared, by the immunological status of highly vaccinated populations. So these variants that we are seeing, they thank their existence and their emergence to the dysregulated immune landscape that they are encountering in highly vaccinated populations. But if that is not the case, if the population is not highly vaccinated, even the people who are not highly vaccinated, they do not contribute to this immunological environment that is almost like required in order for these viruses to thrive. And that is the other huge misunderstanding, which sometimes makes me really sick. When people say, oh yeah, the virus this and the virus that, and now it has these properties, and we don't know whether it's more virulent, whether it's more infectious, and it does this and that. No, all the virus can do is, in fact, to infect cells and to replicate. Of course, it can hide in genomes, etc., but that's not the case for this virus. And of course, it can recombine, but that's a kind also of, at the same level of mutation. But what determines, to a large extent, the behavior of the virus is the immunity. The immunity, and almost nobody talks about this, certainly not at the level of the population. So the Haiti population doesn't have to worry about all this. They have developed natural immunity. They have developed herd immunity against this. So the natural immunity that an individual develops translates at the population level in herd immunity. So this population does not have to worry. The vast majority of the African countries don't have to worry unless they are going to follow the stupid guidance of this stupid organization, the WHO, and I'm talking about their hierarchy. I'm not talking about all the people working there. If they don't do that, there will be no problem. That's at the population level. At an individual level, those people who have developed, and some of them could have been vaccinated, 1 shot, 2 shots, or were already infected before they got vaccinated. Anyway, all those who have developed and trained their innate immune system, they will not be affected either. It's impossible. And when it comes to that point, I will not be hiding in a concrete bunker, right? I will live to the extent possible, normally, but, many things will change. So normal life will not be possible, but I mean, in terms of exposing myself, of getting exposed. So that should be very, very clear. The behavior of this virus, the abnormalities that we have been seeing have been, largely due, almost exclusively, to the large scale intervention in the immune status of entire populations. Over.
Yes. Now, I'm going to ask you a hard question on this, Geert. And this is now where it's a nuanced question. Now, there is a big push to take the vaccines off the market, the COVID vaccines completely. But as I was saying, one of the things that is being noticed in Hong Kong and Singapore, which are highly vaccinated regions, is that the people who are most at risk are those who haven't had their boosters. Okay? If our prediction is right about IgG4 and that it is immune suppressive, even though in the long term it is going to cause further dysregulation and chronic illness, in the short term, if they have nothing else, because they're not giving them any antivirals, if they have nothing else, no other option but to get more IgG4 antibodies or not, should it still be used?
No, definitely not. I think, again, I'm very often talking about the dynamics. There has been a transitional phase. And, I'm the first to say that at some point, these vaccines were still protecting against severe disease. And I'm not talking about all the side effects and all the excess deaths that were due to vaccine-associated adverse events, etc. But, purely the COVID. But you have seen that things evolved. And as now, so initially, for example, everybody knew that when there was an effect, this was due to the neutralizing antibodies, even though they were only still partially neutralized. And then it became very, very clear that there was more contribution, for example, of T cells. And then became to all kinds of different viral proteins. And now at the end, you see this in the mutations. The virus that comes, was only put under pressure initially with regard to the spike protein, and even only certain domains of the spike protein. Then, this susceptibility has been extended to the full spike protein, and now even other viral proteins. So you see that more and more other proteins, for example, are involved, and that now also additional humoral innate, for example, cytokines, etc., are involved. Whereas the updated vaccines are still only concentrating on the spike protein or, certain domains of the spike protein. And so it is impossible to think that any of these, so to say, updated vaccines do still have, any protection. It has been the case to some extent, and there has been a transition phase where there was less and less protection from the vaccine against severe disease. But what you had was that these people were, of course, reinfected by the circulating virus, vaccine breakthrough infections, and those vaccine breakthrough infections, through immune refocusing, were activating other less functional immune effector cells that could contribute or to some extent mitigate the infection. But none of these components, which, by the way, induce increasingly non-specific immune responses, none of these components are incorporated in this kind of, gene therapy vaccines that they intend to use because they can easily be updated for the population, even for these vulnerable people. It doesn't make any sense anymore. 2 years ago, you could have said, yeah, well, okay, we know that in the long term, it may not help them, and it's certainly not good because it will stimulate further immune escape in the population. But now the answer is very, very clear. Even in the short term, it will not have any impact. And, it suffices to study the immunological responses and the mutations that you now see in those viruses for having a clear view on which domains are yet targeted. And there are more and more domains. It's widespread, involving several different viral proteins, whereas these idiots are just going to work on, on the spike protein. It's complete nonsense. No, it cannot work anymore. So they are pretending this because they are benefiting, so to say, from the reinfections of the virus circulating in the population that cause the vaccine breakthrough infections, and that will more, exploit the residual immune defenses that exist. Vaccines will not do this because they don't have any of these components that could stimulate those responses, unless they come maybe with additional adjuvants. Why not?
So, say for instance that I fully expect that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is watching this presentation, and so therefore, what if imagine that he brought you on board, as I think should be done, to give nuance and to challenge directions. Is there anything that you think they could do at this point, or has the horse already bolted?
Yeah, no. My answer is it's too late. It's too late. No, things can't be changed anymore because we are not talking about his I don't know, his brother-in-law or somebody who has a problem where you could try to give some medication. We are talking about at population level. We are talking from a public health viewpoint. Is there still anything that can be done? My answer at this point is very clearly no. I mean, what could have been done was at the very beginning to stop the destruction, because, the full destruction has taken place once Omicron started to circulate, because this was the guy that was able to cause these vaccine breakthrough infections that basically caused the immune refocusing, etc. And so did, by the way, I mean, I've been writing extensively about this in my book, So did the mRNA vaccines. The mRNA vaccines, in their own right, cause immune refocusing. So when this happened, once this happened, I mean, it was too late. At the beginning, we could have limited the destruction. It's like, you have a very beautiful city with a very beautiful, very sophisticated architecture. It just takes one bomb to destroy the full thing, and you can no longer rebuild this. It's impossible to rebuild. But if it's not a bomb that you're throwing at this, but you start to destroy it, by tanks attack or, a more gradual destruction, and there you say, guys, now stop it, then of course you can still, to some extent, recuperate what has been lost and rebuild. But if the only thing that is left is rubble, I mean, forget it. You cannot, because then it's about new energies. That was the thermodynamics I was talking about, that will need to start from scratch, still using that part of the population that has built sufficient innate immunity, because the adaptive has been, in highly vaccinated population, at the population level, you can no longer rely to rebuild that population on the adaptive immunity, because that has been dysregulated. It will need to start from those who have sufficient innate immunity. So yeah, therefore I'm not one of the guys who is, trying to get a position at HHS, or is running after people. It's too late. We told them multiple times, and this is not, has nothing to do with RFK Jr. I mean, it's not his fault. I think also the way what he can do is also very limited. Don't forget that Trump is still very much in favor of these big pharma companies doing good business in the US. So, taking the vaccines off the market, forget it. People are so naive. I mean, we have to tell the truth. We have to, continue shouting it from the rooftops, but don't be naive and don't think that any of these things that are now going on in terms of human discussions, etc., will change it. I mean, it sounds arrogant. Okay, for one time I can be arrogant. It's not towards you, Philip, but I feel like I'm light years ahead of what is currently happening in the whole corona landscape, right? All kinds of human efforts, to try to get things done, but that is nothing. That is peanuts compared to the intervention that nature will certainly will have. It will have the last word in this in this crisis. I mean, for me, there is absolutely no doubt about this, and I can only advise people to start already right now to reconnect with nature, because this arrogance and megalomania, I mean, this for me is just unbelievable. We told in detail about the resilience of the immune system, what it can do. For me, completely unexpected. I've been dedicating many years of my life to immunology, virology. Incredible. I mean, I was completely wrong with my timelines, because I didn't take into account this kind of sophisticated, resilience mechanism to protect such valuable such valuable animal species as humans, right? This is just spectacular, and I mean, I'm full of respect and admiration, and feel very humble talking about these things. Over.
So, where I think that you're saying, and I remember the first time you said this and it registered to me, it actually registered to me after we had finished the live, and I reflected on what you had said. And similarly, with what you've just said, there's nothing that we can do. So let me put it across in a way that makes sense to me. Where we are now is that the proportion of the population who are still circulating virus and are unable to properly neutralize the infection are now a risk to the whole population and the ecosystem with animals. And therefore, the only way that nature can resolve this is to stop those people from being able to circulate virus, and that means they can't be here.
Yeah,
And that's as bluntly as I can say it.
yeah.
Would you say that is about where we are now?
Yeah, certainly, because you still hear then some virologists saying, okay, this virus will now evolve more or less in the direction of other chronic infections, viruses that cause chronic infections like HBV or hepatitis C, for example, also some cytomegalovirus or chronic viral infections or HIV, of course, that is always the comparator. So they think that nature will not manage, to start from scratch again and to rebuild exactly what has been destroyed. They really think that nature will have to watch how this virus has been, so to say, transformed in a virus that now causes chronic infection and that the population will have to live with. And how many times have they told us we will have to live with that virus? We will have to live with that situation, and therefore an annual update, annual vaccination, etc., like the flu. No, that is not what is going to happen. Nature is going to fully correct that situation, and in order to do this, it will take the adequate measures to be able to do this. But we know that it can only be done if we are having a population that is capable of eliminating this virus, of cutting the transmission of the virus and generating herd immunity. So when I say nothing can be done, then of course I mean at a population level. I'm not talking about individual cases. I'm saying if I were if I were at risk because I would have long COVID, for example, or I would have know that I would know that I'm suffering from a chronic infection, then yeah, of course, I would try to do something to protect myself. Ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, maybe, there is so many other, well, not that many maybe, but a lot of other drugs that could potentially be considered, depending on whom you're talking to. So individually, yes, people can try, but we are talking about population level. We are talking about public health. We are talking about a phenomenon that is global, a pandemic, for example. There we have missed the train. We have messed up the situation, and we will have to wait how nature deals with this. But it will be properly done. What the exact consequences will be, nobody knows. Nobody knows. But yeah, it will. What can be said for sure, I would say this for sure, is that the price we will pay will be much higher than if we would have, dealt with this pandemic as intelligent humans, people that are ill, treat them as early as we can because we have the medication, etc. And then a number of other measures, maybe, of course, that we have some, we avoid, for example, crowding, we avoid gatherings in small places, etc. All this could have helped, certainly, to mitigate the impact of the original natural pandemic. And so the price would have been relatively low. Now the price will be much higher. And we are already paying the price, right? With the excess deaths and all the cases that we see, and not to talk about all the side effects of this, of these vaccines, where we all know they have put on the market without any decent clinical investigations, clinical studies, etc. So that adds on top of this. But I always said all these effects, these side effects, are peanuts with regard to the impact we will see when, at the population level, we get a virus that is fully immune evasive and can spread like wildfire, because in the vast majority of the population, of highly vaccinated population, it will find the ideal breeding ground for replication and propagation. Over.
So, yes, Gert, this is heavy stuff. And as we close out now, and I'm reflecting, as I said, it's always heavy because I know what you are seeing. And it's kind of like almost when I see patients, say, who have cancer and they've got terminal cancer. And there is always hope, but you know that in reality, there is not a lot we can do to stop the outcome. We may be able to delay it a little bit, but the outcome is always going to be the same.
Mm.
And it feels very similar now, what you're saying is this is a situation that we've brought on ourselves. It has terminal consequences to a portion of society. It's kind of like an amputation of an arm
Mm.
that has to happen in order to save the body from the infection. That actually is the perfect analogy. We see that in diabetics, their foot gets infected, you can't heal it any longer. And in effect, the only way to save the body is to take off the leg. And there is nothing else you can do. No amount of hope, no amount of arguing, no amount of bargaining
Yeah.
will change
Mm.
that outcome.
Yeah. 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 And again, at the individual level, we may be wrong for some individuals. We may be wrong. There will be exceptions to that rule, but I cannot imagine that there will be exceptions at the population level, right? So I don't know whether you understand what I mean. So at the
I
individual
understand.
level,
Yes, I understand. So for some people, it doesn't mean that this will be the situation for every individual person.
exactly.
But at a population level,
Yeah.
almost as if when we think about countries like Haiti, or even like Bulgaria, who didn't intervene too much, they did have excess mortality during 2020 and so on. But once they had passed through it and the population had herd immunity, they were okay. Now, when you have a situation where you have intervened and therefore the outcomes invariably are pointing to worse numbers, there is no way to undo that.
No.
You can only triage it, mitigate it, minimize it as best as you can, but you can't stop the inevitable.
Yeah, there is a limit to what the immune system can do. The immune system has been doing a fabulous job in mitigating, the effect of the mess that we have been generating. But there is an endpoint to that. There is an endpoint, and when that endpoint will be reached, I mean, the mitigation efforts of the immune system will stop. It cannot be otherwise. And just to be fully complete with what we are saying here, we were talking about exceptions for people who are at risk. But I would say there are also exceptions for people who are, for example, not vaccinated at all. Again, if these people are not taking good care of their health, if they are not are having, for example, underlying diseases, have a bad lifestyle, I'm not ruling out that they could be at risk as well. I'm not necessarily saying they're going to develop severe disease and die, but they could certainly develop um, the disease, because don't forget that the virus that is circulating is still highly infectious, right? And so the first line of immune defense, this forces our first line of immune defense is not good at stopping a high viral load. It can only do this provided it has been trained. But again, training doesn't help. For example, if the day before, or you have a hangover before because you were drunk the day before, or you did not sleep, etc., you cannot then fully exploit the effect of your training. So there can be exceptions as well. People who think, I'm not vaccinated, so I don't care. There is no risk whatsoever. I can live a wild life, etc. So just to be very clear on both sides.
And so, therefore, in summary, Garth, uh, is there, in the midst of your concerns and the anxieties and so on, as you close out, is there any message of hope, or what is the reality?
Well, my message of hope, but Philip, I'm always talking, and I'm sticking to this focus is at the population level. And for me, at the population level, there is hope because I'm pretty much convinced. I'm cautious since I missed a couple of timelines, so I'm not going to pronounce myself on timelines, but I'm in fact very much convinced. But what I'm going to officially say is that I'm rather convinced that what will happen will be very fast. I don't think this will happen over months and months. It will be very fast. That's one thing. And the second thing is that if I think about this, if I think about the effect, I think that it will have a huge collateral benefit with regards to all the crises that we are currently witnessing in this stupid world, right? I mean, there is so many things going wrong that sometimes I think we it would be great if we could start somewhere, from scratch again. And that I'm very hopeful that for the next generation, or maybe even still our generation, there will still be an opportunity to build things from scratch, and where lots of discussions that are now simply resulting from all the luxury we have, will simply not take place, and it will just be about building the things that are essential to a healthy life, as well physically as mentally, which is now becoming very often a huge problem in this world. So in that regard, I'm very positive. It's kind of like starting a new cycle in not too long from now. That is at least my prediction.
Thank you very much, Gert. Thank you for the 1,800 people who are with us live. We appreciate you listening and making comments. It says these are, as usual, quite challenging words, but as I said, I have learned now, after listening to Gert for many years. This is now 4 years of listening to you and observing your predictions and your science, that the science is correct. What is difficult is to know the timing. And even now, as I reflect carefully on what you have said, I think that you are right, Gert. It is not helpful for us to continue to have this continuous ongoing virus. It is actually detrimental to society. And so we probably do have to accept that whatever way this is resolved, it will probably be better in the long run for humanity and the ecosystem with animals as well.
Yeah.
But let's see. We'll take it one day at a time, and we'll certainly continue to review the science. Thank you very much, Gert. And if you will just stay with me until after the outro.
Yeah, my pleasure, Philip.